What is the meaning of life? If this question has been driving you nuts, here's some advice. Maybe start smaller, like cellular small, because the real question is, what does it mean to even be alive? The thing about being alive is that it's actually one of the most complicated things ever, which is why there's a whole branch of science dedicated to life itself. Hi, I'm Callie Moore, and this is Study Hall's Life Sciences Tune-Up. The life sciences are a branch of science focused on living organisms and life processes, which of course is super broad. So just like with the other branches of science, we can break life sciences into some smaller, more manageable parts. Like biology is the study of all life and living organisms ever. No big deal, right? It covers everything from biochemistry, the study of chemical processes within living organisms, to things like medicine and anatomy. Other fields of biology include botany, the study of plants, and zoology, which includes all animals, and bumps up against my favorite, paleozoology. We consider all of those fields to be life sciences because they all study living things, and all living things have some stuff in common. For starters, living things are organized, meaning they contain specialized, coordinated parts like the mitochondria in a cell or bones in a human body. All living things also use energy and consume nutrients, whether you're a person snarfing on a tofu burger or a fern using photosynthesis. We call that process metabolism. Then there's our internal environments. All living things maintain a stable and balanced system through homeostasis. We're like self-regulating machines that respond to changes in our environment, which is why you're sweating buckets every summer and shivering during a blizzard. Living things also grow from seeds or eggs or babies and so on. And we reproduce, meaning we can make new organisms. As that happens, we evolve, changing over generations through the process of natural selection, which generally favors living things that adapt better to their environment over those that don't. These common characteristics of life are helpful to know about if you're interested in studying this stuff more. And once you've got this foundational stuff down, you're well on your way to being able to dig deeper into life's complexity. Let's build our way up from small to big. One of the smallest units of life is the cell. We know that because we can see all those characteristics we talked about in individual cells, like they're made up of distinct parts. There's organelles, like the mitochondria, and genetic material like DNA and RNA that tells cells how to operate. There's also a cell membrane or cell wall, a boundary that lets things in and out of the cell. That's super important for letting water in, which is critical. Water lets living things metabolize, self-regulate, and do all our other basic functions. And all of life is built up from there. Some cells, like bacteria, are prokaryotic. They're super simple organisms that don't have a nucleus. Other cells are eukaryotic, which are more complex. They can do really intense building projects, organizing into tissues or groups of cells with similar structures. Those tissues can become big collections that form organs, really important parts like a heart or a leaf that can do critical work. Organs work as part of larger organ systems, like the human circulatory system or a plant's root system. Getting even bigger, organ systems create organisms. And while those can be single-celled, here we're thinking more about multicellular organisms like mushrooms, magnolias, marmots, my neighbor Mark. If a bunch of those organisms live and organize together, they're called a population. Gather a bunch of populations and voila, you have a community. Which brings us to another field, ecology, the study of living relationships and how populations change and grow over time. It looks at relationships between organisms, studying things like competition over resources in space, mutualism, where organisms benefit one another, predation, where some living things hunt others, and parasitism, where organisms live on or inside hosts. But it also looks at relationships between organisms and their environments or ecosystems, which all come together to form the biosphere, which includes the land, air, water, and the nearby atmosphere. And within those, there are structures and relationships that circulate matter and energy and keep our planet going. For example, biogeochemical cycles like the water cycle and the carbon cycle, and food webs, the complex interconnected food chains that transfer energy from one organism to the next. All of that is the kind of stuff you'll be dealing with when you study the life sciences. But the next question is, how do we get that knowledge and where do we go from there? Well, here's one example of what it can actually look like to do life sciences and build our knowledge of the life sciences. Back in the 1960s, ecologist Robert Payne did an experiment. He wanted to see what happened in an ecosystem when its top predators were gone. So he found an ecosystem he could study. Tide pools in Washington state. The top predator in the tide pools were these cool purple sea stars. Their favorite food? Barnacles and mussels. At the time, ecologists thought ecosystems were stable as long as they had species diversity, and that all species within an ecosystem played equal roles. But Payne began systematically removing the sea stars from the tide pools to observe what happened. First, the population of acorn barnacles expanded to take up the space left by the sea stars. Then California mussels started to take over. As they multiplied, they decimated other species like algae. Ultimately, without the purple sea stars, species diversity was reduced by almost 50%. Payne went on to coin the term keystone species, which refers to species like those purple sea stars that are disproportionately important to an ecosystem. They hold it together, and without them, the ecosystem no longer functions the same way. The term has gone on to be used for everything from wolves to beavers to mangrove and coral. And it's changed the way ecologists think about ecosystems. Payne followed the scientific method in his work. He had a question, designed an experiment to answer his question, gathered data, and made an analysis. But how do we know it wasn't a fluke? And are the sea stars and mussels okay? This guy just changed an entire ecosystem. Especially compared to the physical sciences, life sciences come with some extra layers of complexity and diversity. So behind the scenes, Payne had a lot to consider when he designed and conducted his experiment, and so do all life scientists. For one thing, life sciences are less generalizable than physical sciences. You can't necessarily look at one purple sea star or one tide pool and know what all the others are like, which means we have to modify the scientific method a bit to account for variability, or differences among species and populations, or among individuals within those groups, or even among cells within those individuals. And when we do that, we have to get to a point where we can still understand basic truths without drawing broad, inaccurate conclusions. Think about it. Say you're studying carbon, the chemical element that forms the foundation of all of life on Earth. The isotope carbon-12 represents nearly all carbon found in living organisms. And a bunch of carbon-12 atoms will all behave exactly the same way. So anything you find out about one carbon-12 atom will apply to any other carbon-12 atom. Easy peasy. Unfortunately, life's not that simple. If you, say, assemble a handful of platypuses, or, whatever a group of them is called, a pack of platypodes, a puddle of platypi, the situation is immediately way more complicated. Obviously, have you ever tried to wrangle a paddle of platypuses? Even if they're close siblings, those platypuses will behave differently. They're living things, which means that even if they look really similar, none will be completely identical. So when we design life sciences experiments, we have to consider sources of variation. That means thinking about stuff like genetics and environments, which influence diversity. And we need to be ready for how differences in methodology or procedure can introduce even more variability. When Robert Robert Payne did his experiment, he systematically removed purple sea stars from one area of the shore and made sure they were truly taken out of the ecosystem. But say another researcher was less thorough. The sea stars might repopulate, making it hard to tell how important they really were. You can avoid errors by doing things like ensuring consistency and precise measurement. But some things are trickier. Environmental variation isn't too hard to manage in a lab with things like cleaning products to make sure there's no contamination. But it's a bit harder if your lab is a swamp or a desert or a mountain, or a bunch of tide pools on the Pacific coast. A storm or a family on their beach vacation could jostle things around and interrupt your experiment. We can still do good experiments despite these hurdles. One important method is to have a control or control group in your experiment. For example, Payne removed sea stars from one area of the shore, but he kept another area as a control where he didn't remove the sea stars. That way he could compare what happened to the ecosystem when he removed its top predator to what naturally happened in that ecosystem without his interference. Without the control, Payne wouldn't have been able to say for sure if the results of his experiment were due to the removal of the sea stars or some other unknown factor. Experiments in the life sciences often rely on statistics, which gives us tons of tools to separate the signal from the noise. Stats show us that we can get more accurate representative answers if we use large sample sizes, like by removing purple sea stars from a bunch of tide pools instead of just one. If the results are the same in multiple tide pools, that tells us a lot more about sea stars than if we just had one tide pool that could have been a fluke. We can also rely on randomization, which means using techniques to randomly assign participants or subjects to different groups rather than relying on human choice. Say you're experimenting on that group of platypuses and you have to divide them up. One group will be the control and the other gets, say, an extra crayfish to eat every day. You'd need to randomly divide the platypuses. Otherwise, you might put all your favorites in one group, or all the cutest or healthiest or best swimmers, and that might mess with your results. If that wasn't enough to think about, life sciences also come with more ethical concerns. Is it ethical to give the cutest platypuses extra crayfish, or to remove sea stars from their environment and allow the mussels to take over, or to declare sea stars more important than mussels and barnacles? Luckily, there are pretty strong regulatory controls around experiments on animals or people, including things like informed consent or using non-living alternatives whenever possible. But at the end of the day, you're still doing science on living things, most of which probably didn't get a say in being a science experiment. And by the way, if you're concerned, Robert Payne did eventually stop removing the purple sea stars from the tide pools. When he did, the shoreline began to return to the state it had been in before Payne's experiment. There were fewer mussels, more purple sea stars, and a more balanced ecosystem. So that's what it looks like to do life science. It requires care, attention, and flexibility. It's a bit less controllable than the physical sciences, but that shows us how complex and diverse life can be. If that's appealing, good news! Now you've got to start on the tools and mindset you'll need to learn more within the life sciences. Sure, studying life can be complex, but one of the coolest things about the life sciences is that the more we learn, the more we find out how much we still don't know. And the more that opens us up to asking questions, exploring, and finding new ways to understand science, our world, and maybe even the meaning of life. If you're currently in or thinking about going to college, go to gostudyhall.com for more student resources and check out our $25 college courses. Thanks for watching. See you next time.